Can you wrap your head around the fact that Africa's food and agricultural market could skyrocket from $280 billion a year in 2023 to a whopping $1 trillion by 2030? With 60% of the planet's uncultivated arable land, it's no wonder the agriculture sector makes up 35% of Africa's GDP and employs more people than any other sector. So why on earth does Africa shell out $78 billion on food imports annually, with some countries like Zimbabwe, Guinea, and Sudan spending over 100% of their foreign currency receipts? And how come in 2020, over 20% of Africans were going hungry, double the rate of any other region in the world? If you're curious about these questions, check out this video. The climate of sub-Saharan Africa tends to be good for food production, and the region has a lot of water and fertile land. Its economies also rank as some of the fastest growing in the entire globe. Despite this, the region has the worst rate of food insecurity in the world, in part because its governments have not done enough to address the issue. At an earlier agriculture conference in Cape Town, Nelson Agyemang, vice president of the Ghana Cooperative for Agricultural Producers, declared that political will is the main reason for Africa's food insecurity. He added that they don't have strong leadership that understands how funding agriculture may help lower poverty rates generally. Despite the fact that 70% of Africans work as farmers, there's still a widespread famine and hunger, especially in the Sahel and Horn of Africa. Over a third of children in sub-Saharan Africa have stunted growth, and 1 in 4 people experience malnutrition, according to the UNDP's 2012 Human Development Report. In contrast to common belief, countries that rely heavily on agriculture are the ones who are hardest hit by food insecurity. This is because smallholder farmers provide 90% of Africa's food supply. Because of their poor output, half of them also face food insecurity. Africa's population is expected to double by 2050, increasing the continent's food needs by 1.1 billion people and escalating already existing issues. So it seems like the issue of food insecurity in Africa is going from bad to worse. According to Mary Munene, coordinator of the Kenyan cooperative Land O'Lakes, there won't be sufficient agricultural land left by 2050 to feed the world's expanding population. The causes of food insecurity are many. These include HIV, poverty, war, and crop losses brought on by floods and droughts. However, experts think that inadequate policies along with failing institutions are the primary reasons of hunger. According to UNDP's Guinea Netu, regional director for Africa, decades of poor governance stem from chronic food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa. Agriculture was pushed to the edge by a number of African governments who supported other industries with financial assistance, subsidies, and other incentives. The bulk of sub-Saharan countries suffer from slow farming, collapsing rural infrastructure, and sluggish food systems as a result of this bad governance. Can you believe that 95% of agriculture in Africa still gets its water mostly from rainfall? Zimbabwe, previously dubbed Africa's breadbasket, is a good example. Since an unpopular land reform in 2000 reduced Zimbabwe's once thriving modern agriculture sector to one that focuses primarily on subsistence farming, the country has experienced food insecurity. Sithembisio Nyoni, Zimbabwe's Minister of Small and Medium Enterprise Development, said, "We've been going through difficult economic times. Sharing the relatively tiny cake that's created has shown to be a little challenging." According to Nyoni, the Zimbabwean government has always placed a high value on education as an instrument for development. But according to Rwanda's Minister of Trade and Industry, Francois Kanimba, the country plans to invest $235 million on agricultural-focused rural redevelopment with the aim of delivering irrigation to 40% of its farmers within the next 5 years. Now that you know how bad things are in Africa in terms of food insecurity, it won't be surprising to know that colonialism has had a role in this. 3 Australian professors stated in a 2021 essay that the long-lasting impacts of colonialism are the true cause, even though climate and geology play a part. The essay was published on The Conversation. They claimed that before colonization, farmers in Africa raised robust crops that lived in harmony with the natural landscape and were sensitive to the different ecological groups that dominate the continent. This balance was disrupted by the new agricultural model established by colonialism. Food production required labor and land that were diverted toward the production of export commodities like cotton, cocoa, and tea. Some analysts claim that colonization has had an effect on Africa, But the statement remains pointless since it places blame for even the current problems African Americans confront on other parties. Very few East and Southeast Asian countries experience food insecurity despite their invasion. A counterpoint to this line of thinking is the argument made by organizations like the World Resources Institute, which argues that developed nation agricultural subsidies reduce African farmers' ability to produce food by disrupting the global food market. Additionally, other markets like cotton and sugar are typically the ones that are most affected by these subsidies. Rice, maize, and wheat are the primary imported foods consumed in Africa. These usually come from nations like Brazil, India, and Ukraine that do not offer any support to its farmers. An additional viewpoint claims that small-scale farms in Africa lack efficiency and competitiveness. This also makes logic. Large farms are more common in nations with highly productive and well-established agricultural sectors. So get this. African countries are producing food, but not for themselves to eat. While the primary cereals of the African diet, wheat and rice, are mostly imported, a sizable portion of the continent's farmlands are devoted to the production of goods for export, such as coffee, cocoa, and cottonseed oil. According to the World Bank, much of this food that is imported might really be cultivated locally. In addition, the degree of self-sufficiency in African countries will increase if native crops are replaced for imported cereal. Such goods can be exchanged between African nations, providing the young people there with essential labor and money for their farms. The crops would also form the foundation of a nutritious diet. According to Pauline Chivenge, a researcher of the African Plant Nutrition Institute in Morocco, native crops could have significantly more nutritional value than currently consumed cereals. Their benefits go beyond preserving food security. These typically include higher amounts of protein and vitamins in addition to the necessary amount of calories, making them a better source of nutrients. However, native crops have long been left out, primarily as a result of government and multinational corporations pushing for large-scale cultivation of basic commodities like maize and wheat. In fact, automation, research, and development have been directed to the production of maize, rice, and wheat in huge monocrop fields at the expense of the local biodiversity. However, most of Africa's water-scarce regions make it infeasible to cultivate cereals like wheat and maize. Their primary reliance is on consistent rainfall, which is becoming increasingly scarce due to climate change. So, you're probably curious if African smallholder farms are just feeding the entire continent with their own crops. According to Wolfgang Bockelmann, a food and agricultural economist at Berlin's Humboldt University, locally produced products are marginalized. He conducted a study on Kenya's domestic production and consumption of numerous native vegetables from 2015 to 2018, and he mentioned, "The vegetables we studied had previously fallen out of fashion and used to be known as the poor man's food due to the dominance of the foreign produce that colonization brought to Kenya." Using indigenous foods has benefits beyond the ecosystem and human health. Native foods have the potential to strengthen neglected communities, female farmers in particular. On the outer edges of towns, home greenhouses may produce a wide variety of crops quickly. A set of small native crop farms can serve as a significant supply of food for the growing population of slums and marginal towns in Africa, given the current pattern of people migrating from rural to urban areas. Well, what obstacles are they facing? So the thing is, there are quite a few challenges when it comes to growing more native crops. See, the farmers who grow these crops don't have easy access to fertilizers, which means they can't produce a lot. Plus, they don't have the right tools to store and cook the food they harvest. And it's hard to get fresh, uncooked food to other African markets quickly. It's tough for African countries to start growing their own food instead of exporting cash crops to richer countries. They have to decide between supporting small-scale farming for local food or mass-producing goods for export to feed a lot of people. According to some experts, the reason larger monoculture farms produce more has to do with the fact that they're simpler to automate and operate. Bulk crops are also preferred because they're easy to market and transport. Mass production of exportable crops is supported by the argument that it offers African countries financial power on the world scale and advances the modernization and advancement of African agriculture. Even so, production and distribution will need to change as the crisis in Ukraine is endangering the world's food supplies. A while back, it was thought to be a great idea to establish a globalized market where every nation imports the goods it needs from other nations and exports the goods it can produce. To sum it up, it seems like the food security issues in Africa could be fixed with a mix of economic growth and education. As African economies grow and farming becomes a more respected profession for educated individuals with access to resources, the sector will become more skilled. This will lead to increased productivity and less need for labor. Eventually, Africa will produce more food than it needs thanks to a smaller group of well-trained farmers. And once governments start building better infrastructure like highways, the last hurdle to food security on the continent will be cleared. Thanks for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to receive more content, and share with us your thoughts in the comments section. See you in the next video.